And now it takes us to another album from 1962, Roy Orbison, Crying, with the mask on the front, a very definitive cover, I think. Like
Yep.
it stands out to me at least. And we actually, this isn't our true first time covering Roy Orbison,
Right.
because we did the Traveling Wilburys back when. It's funny because it's in his career. It's, let's see, that was 88, I believe, and this is 62, so it's a full 26 years later. But in our journey, we covered it ahead of time.
Back when Matt was on the show.
Yes, back when Matt was on the show, we covered this. So Roy Orbison, boy, it's going to be hard to do a short bio on him, so I'll try to just do a general one. I like to give a context of where an artist is in their career. So we're covering the album. So at this point, Roy Orbison's going to be 26 years old when this album's coming out.
Okay.
Yeah. He was born April 23rd, 1936 in Vernon, Texas. And much like Patsy Cline, who we did before, he comes out of a tradition, but then brings it in a different direction. So in his case, he comes from the rockabilly tradition, that, obviously Elvis comes from, and early Johnny Cash comes from that, and Carl Perkins is another artist there. And he, much like Patsy Cline, changes gear in the early 60s, and he goes from that type of music to a more pop sound, traditional rock and roll, but with a little bit of a country twang as well to it. So he's kind of operating in some ways, Josh, in the same lane that Patsy Cline is, like pop star with a little bit of country, a little bit of early rock and roll. Yep. And he's also interesting because, and you read this and you're like, it's absolutely true, but you don't want to come at it from the wrong way. But they kind of said what stood out about Roy Orbison, besides obviously his voice being completely distinctive, is the fact that in that era, a lot of the folks were sort of gussied up, right, to be like teen idols and stuff. But Roy Orbison never was considered to be like a teen idol, right? Or like, it was really they said like a lot of stuff would say like he wasn't as photogenic as the stars at the time, and even on stage he didn't have the charisma, right? It was more just he just played and got by on the songs, right? A little bit more. And got by is probably too trite to say. It's always interesting though when someone is making their career largely without the accoutrements, I guess I would say. And he's in the same era as I think probably in some ways his closest peer in that era, someone we didn't cover, is Del Shannon, is someone doing sort of the same type of music in this era, just for reference, I think. Roy Orbison, it's amazing actually how similar his career is to Patsy Cline's, because he's making his in fact, I'm trying to think. Like, she died at 30 in 1963. We said he's 26, so 1963. So there's about a 3-year age gap between the two of them as well in terms of their career, with Patsy Cline being a little bit older. So Orbison's making recordings for Sun Records in 1956. He had a song that became a little bit of a hit called Ooby Dooby, but then he kind of never connected with the rockabilly music. I think it just kind of didn't fit his image. He liked singing ballads a lot more. And he's kind of focusing on being a songwriter already at the end of the 50s. He writes the song Claudette for the Everly Brothers, goes to RCA Records and doesn't do very well there, and then ends up at Monument Records. And in 1960 kind of has his breakthrough. The song Only the Lonely hits number 2 on the charts. Once again, something you would probably know immediately with Roy Orbison. And once again, much like Crazy on the Patsy Cline thing, not on the album we're covering tonight. So that's kind of a precursor to what we're covering tonight. And so that sort of also established the Roy Orbison sort of sound, and also his look, right? The glasses, the suits, and stuff like that. And along the way, he's being produced once again. The Patsy Cline stuff is called orchestral. I saw symphonic a lot for Roy Orbison's production, in terms of what's there, and lots of backup vocalists behind him, both on this album. But yeah, between 60 and 65, he actually has 15 top 40 hits, including multiple ones on this album. And, he kind of seems like in the mid 60s, I read quite a bit that kind of everybody thought he would adapt very well to the Beatles landscape because the Beatles loved him, right? And
Right.
John Lennon even tries to sing like him, but he kind of just, it didn't happen. After 1965, he leaves Monument for MGM, and it just doesn't click for him the rest of the way. And pretty much he's touring overseas in the 70s to kind of maintain his living, and that goes all the way to the mid 80s.
Wow.
Yeah, and along the way, there's just so much that his wife dies in an accident, his house burns down,
Jeez.
he has multiple of his sons die in that fire, which is horrible. In the 70s, he's just releasing albums, and it's just not happening. But then, Josh, there's a couple things that I don't want to say obscurity because he wouldn't have been obscure, but kind of revitalize his career, which of
Okay.
course in the mid 80s, it's crazy because his career gets revitalized only for him to pass away young shortly after it gets revitalized. The first is that David Lynch uses In Dreams in Blue Velvet, which I absolutely, you and I both like David Lynch, and
Yep.
we do that. And it led to an album being recorded by T-Bone Burnett of the album, and it kind of just brought him back to consciousness. And then it just so happens that George Harrison's making a super group, and he is a big Roy Orbison fan, and he decides he wants Roy Orbison in the group, and so he joins the Traveling Wilburys, and it's coming fast and furious for him. He records the album Mystery Girl, which is sort of a new album, but trying to record the 60s sound. It reaches the charts in early 1989, but unfortunately, he passed away from a heart attack in December of 1988. And I was trying to figure out how old Roy Orbison was when he passed away, so I'm just doing my math right now. He was 52 years old, Josh. So unfortunately, another early death for sort of a timeless singer. So
Right.
I don't want to leave on a negative trait like that because I think Roy Orbison's legacy has persisted to this day. And you're kind of happy that he got a revitalization there at the end of
Yeah.
his career.
Second act. Yep.
Well, this is your first act of talking about Roy Orbison, Josh. So what'd you think?
Well, we some of the things we talked about when we talked about Traveling Wilburys, and you mentioned this as well, but his voice is undeniably unique, and there is nobody else that I have listened to that has the same type of delivery with his voice. He has kind of this warbling quality to it, and it's also, which in some ways makes it timeless, and he also always sounds, I don't know, he's always struck me as an old person throughout his entire career, when I was younger, even though he died
some of
at
that's the
52,
look.
right? Yeah, and he has this distinct look, right? He's always in all black in like these big like wraparound sunglasses, and
Yeah, you almost don't know if he's like the glasses, right? Like you don't know
Right.
if it's because he's blind or if it's because he's going for style. Like it's very mysterious.
yeah, so not only is his voice distinct, and I feel like anybody that would hear a Roy Orbison song would know it was him by that fact, but his look has always been very distinct, and he carried that through even when he was in the Traveling Wilburys. It's not like he just suddenly threw color into his wardrobe or something.
Yeah, like he wasn't. Yeah, he wasn't like doing an '80s look, right? He still
Right,
was Roy
yeah.
Orbison in 1988. Yeah.
Yeah, so in some that makes him timeless because he's never changed throughout his entire career in his look or sound, and this album really highlights the power and uniqueness of his voice, kind of similar to Patsy Cline. I thought it was interesting, the structure of the album. I don't know if this was intentional or not. I mean, I guess it must have been, but really the first half of the album is kind of really slower songs with like love songs and ballads, and then it picks up, and the back half is more like upbeat, up tempo with more dancey tracks, more kind of Elvis like or Beatles, like what they would do with their songs. And so you kind of get both flavors of what he brings to the table in terms of theme, or tempo. And the other thing that kind of stood out to me is, well, a couple things, but one, he has this kind of like, I kept trying to find out what it was, but he has this like Latin American or Mexican sound that he adds to his songs that I kept picking up on through the instrumentation and stuff. And I was like, what is that? And why am I picking up on that? And it's like this bolero sound that he really kind of that he embodied or incorporated into his music. And the bolero is a Cuban originating sound, and it's also kind of related to Spanish originations.
Well, and he is from
Spain.
Texas, so that does kind of track. Yeah.
Yep. So it's this quintessential Latin American romantic sound, and it's you can read all about what the bolero is and the instruments in that, but that's what I was picking up on. And it's definitely, being from Texas, that was probably in the air and in the culture there, and so that adds some distinction as well through this album that I picked up on. Again, the production is really great on this album as well. It sounds like he's playing with a full band, not only in the rock and roll sounds, but in the ballads and on the first half.
Now, were you a fan of the Phil Spector production, Josh, or no? I know Matt was not.
Yeah, I'm not as much the wall of sound person. I like being able to pick out and kind of hear the depth on
right.
the album.
And that is a difference here. It's not, the wall part of it is not here. It's very similar in terms of what they're going to do, but instead of blowing it all together, each of the parts are distinct here. So I was wondering, because you said you liked the production on both of these albums, and I'm like, that's interesting, because I seem to remember you not liking that Phil Spector production, and there's some similarities, but...
Oh, you feel like this has a Phil Spector-esque quality?
I feel like what this led to was what Spector started doing later, for sure.
Got it. Yeah, I think... No, I really like the production on this. I feel like this wasn't, you could hear everything with the strings and the horns and guitars, and there's a tuba even, I think, on the song Lana, which is pretty distinct. I haven't heard many tubas throughout our journey. It's a primary instrument on that song, and even piano as well. But the standout tracks for me would be, Crying. Again, also like the Patsy Cline album, there's a lot of covers on here, songs that other people have covered, that you may be more familiar versions of, but were around for a long time. But
I think Great Pretender and Love Hurts are probably the two that people would know right off the bat.
Yep, definitely. But Crying is a standout track for me. The Running Scared, which is the last track, I really liked. But really, again, it's remarkable. 30 minutes for the Patsy Cline album, 30 minutes on this one, and it just breezes by, and I enjoyed listening to it.
Yeah, this was an interesting one. I just to go back to something I was saying before, I think that the reason I think of the wall of sound with this is it's a very similar, like, orchestral, lush production. I think the difference is the wall of sound, it's taking those instruments and like doubling and tripling them, right? Where this is just playing them the one time. And I guess that might be the part that resonates with you. It will be interesting to hear what Matt thinks, because I think he was even more negative on it than you. So I don't know if that will be a barrier for him on these albums when we talk about them. I'll start by saying my favorite track on this album is Let's Make a Memory. I think that's the one that does. I think the second half of this album's a lot stronger for me than the first half of the album, in my opinion. Like you said, it's a little bit more up-tempo. I think there's a little bit more instrumental going on. This is sort of really two albums. There's Roy Orbison, who could sing the phone book, and it'd be appealing to me. So I feel like there's a high floor with Roy Orbison, because I just enjoy his voice. And so he doesn't really need great material. With that being said, like, I came into this and I'm like, okay, I know I'm not going to get You Got It, right? That's like his big comeback track, right, from the 80s. Got it. So he was trying to replicate it. But I thought I was going to run into like In Dreams or Blue Bayou or Pretty Woman
Right.
or Only the Lonely. And it's crazy. None of those songs that I would rattle off as Roy Orbison songs are on this.
Biggest
So
hits,
that was, yeah, probably Crying is probably the only one on here that you would know. So that made it interesting for me because I kind of wanted to see. I will say I thought the material here was a little bit lightweight. More so than like the Patsy Cline stuff. I was like, I wish it would have been a little bit more, varied, I'd say,
Yeah.
but I didn't feel the material was weak. I felt it was good for what it was, but it was just sort of like too much dessert, right? This one, I felt like there were some songs that Roy Orbison sort of took up from 4s to 6s, right? Or 6s to 8s, at the best. But when you know what Pretty Woman and like Only the Lonely and In Dreams sound like, and then you hear a lot of these tracks, it really does. It's like, okay, this might not be his best material. And I did not want to peek to see what the consensus was on this, but when I read, it sort of was, that kind of was what people said. It's like, this doesn't necessarily represent the best of his stuff. And you can kind of tell a little bit because I just thought some of the productions were a little bit boring on this, especially on the first half. Having heard The Great Pretender in like 15 different variations, I think this was one of the more boring versions of The Great Pretender.
I agree. Yeah, I was like, I think I like the original. I noted that better.
But I think there's like 4 I can rattle off that I like better of different stuff. And to me, you should really never say that when you've got like a star on the vocals, right? It's almost, I don't want to say unforgivable, but I feel like you need to give a little bit more. And this actually, and why I keep bringing up the Wall of Sound, I actually think this album would have benefited from a little bit more heft in terms of the production. In a way, the Patsy Cline album, I don't think would have. I think the production worked a lot better. Yeah. And so from that sense, we said we're not doing comparative points, but we ended up by accident kind of doing 2 that were there. So I would have to say thumbs in the middle for this one for me. And the reason it gets to the middle is because Roy Orbison's probably one of my top 10 to 15 singers. I think that kind of is what brings it to the middle ground for me. I think without someone of his caliber on the vocals, I might be trended down on this album because it doesn't feel essential to me, which is a shame because I feel like the album I want to cover from Roy Orbison should be essential, but also there's an argument that his best work is singles and the greatest hits approach, right? This is still an album where the album format is still not as big a deal. They're still just releasing singles, right? And sometimes packaging them together. And I think he probably benefits quite a bit from the greatest hits approach.
Yeah, I agree. I think the greatest hits is what would best demonstrate him. And yeah, it's like an inverse of the Patsy Cline album. It's like you've got a variety of songs and themes on this, but the songs themselves aren't as strong as maybe the Patsy Cline work was. So yeah, I'm right there with you. I think his voice was strong enough that it carried me through. If we're comparing though, I think I like the Patsy Cline album more. So and yeah, this would be I guess this probably wouldn't be the best example of a Roy Orbison album, probably the greatest hits. So
I hate saying that because I'm an album guy, but we also have to do context, right? And this is 1962, and we are still looking at albums as collections of singles, not pieces of work, right? Like artistic works yet. And so you do have to kind of evaluate them from that standpoint. And I think that's just going to be more of just something that, that is even like the Motown stuff, right? That we were covering and the pop, that stuff's designed to just be singles and they package them together.
Yeah. And like the Patsy Cline album, this album's more indebted to the past than sort of pushing, or I don't know if Roy Orbison ever, went
even his comeback album was looking back to his classic period. Yeah. Right.
So you have that as kind of a slight deficit as well, but still enjoyable to listen to. So yeah, I'm with you. Probably thumbs in the middle, slight thumbs up on this one.